The lights burn white-hot against polished wood and restless faces. Cameras hover like vultures over the stage, lenses hungry for conflict. 100 murmurs ripple through the hall, the kind that rise before history decides to breathe. At the center, Donald Trump leans forward, eyes glinting, waiting for his turn to dominate. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett adjusts her mic, the faintest smile hidden behind composure. She's mid-sentence, making her point with calm conviction. When it happens, excuse me, sweetheart, let's get the facts straight. Trump cuts in, voice booming like an engine. The words crash through her sentence like a sledgehammer through glass. Gasps echo. A few supporters laugh. The moderator flinches. Crockett doesn't move. Her hands rest on the table. Still, her eyes don't blink. For a moment, she simply studies him, this man who's made a career out of noise. The silence is not submission. It's calculation. The camera zooms in. The clock ticks. 1 second. 2. Trump smirks, convinced he's won the room again, his voice still hanging in the air like smoke. 3 seconds. 4. Someone coughs in the audience. A journalist whispers, "Here we go again." But Crockett doesn't rush. She waits. 5, 6. The nation holds its breath. Social feeds already hum with tension. 7, 8. And then her lips part, deliberate and precise. Her tone is low, almost tender. "Mr. Trump," she says, "if interruptions were evidence, you'd have built a courtroom by now." The air cracks open. Laughter breaks, not cruel, but cleansing, a release of something held too long. Trump's smile falters. The moderator freezes. Even the cameras seem to lean closer. She continues, calm but unyielding, her words cutting with surgical grace. "You've spent years turning volume into virtue, but tonight, I'll remind you, truth doesn't shout." The audience roars. Some stand, others cover their mouths, stunned. 12 seconds ago, arrogance filled the room. Now, silence belongs to her. The shot lingers on Trump's face, confused, searching for recovery that won't come. Crockett doesn't gloat. She simply nods, reclaiming her space, her voice, her dignity. And as applause swells, a question rises beyond the stage. How did 12 seconds rewrite what power looks like? But those 12 seconds didn't just end a debate. They exposed a truth millions were waiting to hear. Before the lights came on that night, the nation already knew what to expect. Every debate featuring Donald Trump followed the same choreography: interrupt, dominate, overwhelm. His followers called it strength. His critics called it noise. Either way, the formula had always worked. He didn't win debates with logic. He won them with volume. He turned words into weapons, the stage into a battlefield, and every opponent into a prop for his performance. The media fed the myth. Clips of his takedowns filled timelines for years. Snappy insults, finger-pointing, smirks that felt rehearsed. He wasn't there to discuss policy. He was there to win airtime. And for too long, that spectacle passed as leadership. But this night was different. Across from him sat a woman who didn't fit his pattern. Jasmine Crockett didn't rise through spectacle or scandal. Her ascent came from quieter places, courtrooms, community centers, the unglamorous work of listening. While Trump built an empire of interruption, she built a foundation of patience. While he shouted his truths into microphones, she whispered them into lives that needed them most. The lead up to the debate was electric. Social media swarmed with predictions. Trump's going to steamroll her. She's not ready for his energy. He'll turn this into entertainment. Every thread echoed the same assumption, that chaos always wins in America's theater of politics. No one questioned that until the curtain rose. Crockett's supporters didn't expect fireworks. They hoped for survival. A few pundits warned she'd be drowned out, turned into another footnote in Trump's endless highlight reel. And yet, there was something about her calm, something steady in the way she prepared. She didn't rehearse punchlines. She studied truth. She didn't plot insults. She planned pauses. By the time she stepped on stage, the air itself felt divided. Trump's side came for a show. Her side came for a shift. The cameras caught it, the contrast between spectacle and substance, noise and nerve, and in those first minutes, it seemed the predictions would hold true. Trump interrupted. He swaggered, he laughed through her points, treating the debate like a late-night monologue. But behind that poise, Crockett wasn't shrinking. She was studying him. She was learning his rhythm, his pattern of chaos, the spaces between his arrogance, because she knew something he didn't. When someone relies on dominance, silence becomes their kryptonite. Every time she paused instead of reacting, the audience leaned in closer. Every second she refused to match his volume, she chipped away at the illusion of control he'd built his career upon. The nation was watching something it hadn't seen in years. Trump losing the stage without even realizing it. Commentators would later call it the quiet before the political storm. Hashtags started forming even before the moment hit. Hashtag Crockett composure. Hashtag truth in silence. Twitter threads whispered that something was shifting, that this wasn't the same old clash of egos. This was something purer, more human, a collision between two American archetypes, the loud and the steadfast, the performer and the public servant, because at its core, that night wasn't about policies or polls. It was about something deeper, the nation's craving for dignity in the face of noise. Millions were tired of being shouted over, at work, at home, in politics. Crockett, in her stillness, became a mirror for every person who had ever been told their calm was weakness. And when Trump interrupted her for the third time, when his words rolled over hers like a wave, the audience didn't see dominance. They saw desperation. But to understand how Crockett's silence became her greatest weapon, we need to know the man who thought no one could ever silence him. For decades, interruption was his language. It wasn't a habit, it was a creed. From boardrooms to debate stages, Donald Trump learned early that the first one to speak wasn't the smartest, but the loudest. His voice didn't wait for permission. It crashed through conversations, steamrolled over nuance, and turned every exchange into an audition for dominance. It wasn't dialogue, it was performance art, and the audience rewarded it every time. His empire was built on noise. The first rallies were electric carnivals of chaos, chants rising like thunder, insults turned into applause lines, tension feeding on itself. Cameras loved it. Every interruption, every nickname, every dismissive handwave was broadcast to millions who confused disruption for authenticity. Trump didn't debate ideas, he devoured airtime. In a world addicted to outrage, he was both supplier and star. Press conferences became his playground. Reporters asked questions. He answered with deflection, mockery, and spectacle. "That's a nasty question," he'd sneer. And suddenly the story wasn't the question, it was the clash. He understood the modern algorithm of power. Attention equals relevance. An interruption was the shortcut. On the campaign trail, it grew into an empire of noise. Supporters cheered not for policy, but for personality. They came for the interruption, the feeling of watching someone break every rule they'd been told to follow. To them, he wasn't rude. He was rebellious. Every verbal ambush was framed as proof of strength, every insult as evidence of fearlessness. The line between charisma and cruelty blurred, and the crowd preferred it that way. But like every empire built on spectacle, cracks formed where ego replaced strategy. Those who worked beside him learned that interruption didn't end when the cameras stopped. Advisors stopped advising. Allies stopped challenging. Loyalty became silence. In private meetings, he cut off generals, economists, lawyers, anyone whose sentences dared outlast his patience. His interruptions weren't just tactics anymore. They were symptoms of isolation. That was power without reflection, volume without understanding. He mistook reaction for respect. He mistook fear for loyalty. And as his world grew louder, it also grew smaller. The press he once dominated began turning the lens back on him. Montage moments told a different story now. Clips of reporters sighing, debate moderators pleading for order, allies wincing mid-intro. His command of the room started to look less like confidence and more like insecurity, disguised as theater. The audience that once roared began to murmur. The novelty was wearing thin, and yet he couldn't stop. Interruption had become his rhythm. The only way he knew to exist. To pause was to risk being forgotten, and for him, obscurity was the real enemy. So he kept talking, louder, faster, drowning even his own meaning beneath his volume. There's a tragedy in that kind of power, the kind that feeds on its own echo. Like a king shouting from the highest tower, not realizing his subjects stopped listening long ago. For years, interruption was his weapon, but tonight, it would become his undoing. Because something about Jasmine Crockett's silence disturbed the foundation of his empire. He had faced critics, senators, journalists, people who fought him with the same energy he unleashed, and every time, the clash kept him alive. He fed on conflict. He thrived on reaction. But Crockett was different. She didn't rise to meet his noise. She let it hang, awkward and heavy, until it devoured itself. Behind the curtain, the old footage played out like prophecy. The moments where he cut off opponents, laughter echoing, moderators sighing. The applause that once crowned him now felt hollow, the repetition mechanical. Every clip was a reminder that dominance built on noise eventually collapses under its own weight. His empire wasn't built on policy or principle. It was built on the illusion that interruption equals control. But control is fragile, and the louder he spoke, the more transparent that fragility became. By the time the Crockett debate arrived, the audience had seen the trick too many times. They still came to watch, but not to cheer. Some came to see if he'd finally meet someone who wouldn't play his game, and he did. That night, when he leaned into the mic to silence her, he didn't realize the stage itself was ready to turn on him. The crowd had changed. The country had changed. The appetite for noise had waned, and something quieter was beginning to rise. A craving for dignity, for calm, for control that didn't need chaos to prove itself. He was still the same man who built his name on interruption. But the world had moved on. What once looked like dominance now looked like desperation. What once earned applause now invited pity. The empire of interruption was cracking in real time, and he was too loud to hear it happen. But standing across from that legacy of noise was a woman who understood silence could be louder than shouting. Before that night, before the cameras, the clash, and the 12 seconds that would echo across every feed, Jasmine Crockett was already tempered by 1,000 smaller battles. She wasn't born into privilege. She was built by grit. Raised in a world that often told her, not you, too young, too loud, too different. Crockett learned early that justice doesn't arrive when you ask politely. You carve it, one argument at a time. As a child in Texas, her mother taught her the quiet dignity of showing up prepared. Her father, a man who never wasted words, taught her that silence can be its own form of power. And somewhere between those two lessons, persistence and restraint, Jasmine Crockett began shaping the voice that would later silence rooms. She didn't start in Congress. She started in courtrooms most cameras never see, defending people who couldn't afford to lose, people who didn't have PR teams, only prayers. And in those fluorescent lit halls, she discovered something that would define her forever. Power isn't in volume, it's in precision. There, in the sharp ring of cross-examination, she learned that words are scalpels, not sledgehammers. She saw lawyers shout and luge, while she whispered and won, because the trick wasn't to sound powerful, it was to be unshakable. One case still lingers in her memory, a teenager wrongfully accused of assault. Everyone said the evidence was airtight, everyone but her. She combed through the transcripts, found a single inconsistency, one word misplaced by a careless officer, and turned it into freedom. That's when she realized something profound. You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room when you understand how to make silence work for you. Years later, as she stepped into the political arena, Crockett carried that courtroom composure with her. She was underestimated again. The young black woman from Texas who didn't look like power, who didn't sound like authority, but she never wanted to look like power. She wanted to be the correction to it. Reporters called her fiery, opponents called her emotional, but those who truly watched her saw something else. A strategist who knew when to burn and when to breathe. She once said in an interview, "I don't raise my voice to match chaos. I refine my argument to dismantle it." And that became her quiet creed, her North Star in every debate, every hearing, every ambush. When they shout, I sharpen, because Crockett knew something her critics didn't. Every interruption is an opening. Every insult is a thesis waiting to be rewritten. She turned condescension into craft. Every time someone underestimated her, she took note of how they did it. The tones, the smirks, the casual dismissal, and built her responses like blueprints, measured, layered, lethal by the time she arrived in Congress. Her style was unmistakable. While others used rage as a weapon, she used rhythm, letting silence hang, letting her opponents fill it with their own noise until they tripped over it. She didn't fight chaos with chaos. She dissected it. Behind the poise was fire, not the kind that consumes, but the kind that forges. She didn't shout to be heard. She spoke so clearly that silence listened back. Every hero in history has a moment, not when they rise, but when the world notices that they already have. For Crockett, that moment was coming, because on that night, under studio lights, in front of millions, her years of restraint would meet their test. She would face an interruption that wasn't just political, it was personal. The embodiment of every dismissal she'd ever endured, and the world would see how a woman forged in fairness responds when power tries to speak over her. She had been preparing for it all along. Every courtroom where she waited to be recognized, every headline that downplayed her intellect and magnified her tone, every sneer that said you're out of your league. They had all trained her for 12 seconds that would define her poise. Because Crockett didn't just defend cases, she defended the principle that truth doesn't need permission to speak. When she looked across that stage and saw Donald Trump interrupt her mid-sentence, she didn't flinch. She didn't break eye contact. She didn't reach for volume. She reached for precision. That's what her entire life had been building toward. Not rage, not reaction, control. And that night, when Trump cut her off mid, those lessons became instinct. Because sometimes, the most powerful sound in politics is not the roar of applause, but the moment a poised voice dismantles arrogance with calm. The fire and the poise, the lawyer and the fighter, the woman who turned interruption into art. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an exchange that night. She revealed a truth that transcends politics. Grace under fire is the loudest revolution of all. The cameras were already rolling. The lights were merciless, white, clinical, exposing every twitch, every blink. This wasn't just a debate. It was a collision of two Americas staged beneath the glare of primetime. At the center of it, Jasmine Crockett, composed, spine straight, eyes steady. Across from her, Donald Trump, pacing within his own orbit, confident, restless, familiar with the game of spectacle. The moderator asked a question, a policy point, nothing remarkable. But Trump saw an opening, not to answer, but to dominate. He leaned forward, voice cutting in before she finished her first clause. Wrong again. Totally wrong. A chuckle followed, rehearsed, condescending. He waved a hand like erasing her existence mid-sentence. Crockett paused. She didn't blink. He interrupted again. Louder this time, drawing laughter from one corner of the audience. The kind of laughter meant to humiliate, not amuse. The moderators glanced nervously between them. One reached for the microphone button. Another gestured weakly for order. It didn't matter. The chaos had begun. Trump smirked, feeding on the rhythm he knew best. Disruption. He laughed, threw glances toward the crowd, toward the cameras. Every interruption was a performance, every gesture a headline, and Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. the stillness of a sniper waiting for her shot. Social media was already on fire. Tweets stacked by the second. Crockett can't get a word in. Trump steamrolling again. Same old show. The nation watched, half in outrage, half in awe. The moderators stumbled through half-hearted appeals. Let's allow Representative Crockett to respond. But he kept going. Louder, faster, flooding the space with noise. He thought he was winning, because in his world, volume equals victory. He pointed, gestured, dismissed, interrupted once more, and the audience shifted in their seats. Something in the air had changed. The laughter was thinner now. The smirk lingered too long. People weren't amused anymore. They were uneasy. Crockett exhaled once. A single breath. Her hands never moved. Her expression didn't crack. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was surveillance. She was studying the rhythm of his arrogance, waiting for the exact second it would overextend. He leaned closer again, cutting off her final attempt to reply. Excuse me, let me finish. You'll get your turn, he said, laughing. Claiming the floor he had already stolen, the moderator tried to regain control. Mr. Trump, please. But by then, control was an illusion. The camera angles began to shift. One on his face, glowing with certainty. One on hers, unreadable, unflinching. Every great confrontation in history has that moment. The pause before reversal. The arrogance before consequence. And here it was. 12 seconds before the storm turned. The audience sensed it before the words came. Something in her stillness, that calculated quiet, became louder than his shouting. Even the moderator stopped fidgeting. Sensing the shift in gravity, Trump's voice continued, booming, confident, drowning the air in his trademark cadence. But beneath it, like a tectonic tremor, her silence began to hum. You could feel it in the pause between his boasts, the stillness of a counterstrike forming. He was still laughing when it happened, still waving his hand, still sure of his control, the kind of surety that blinds. And then, she looked up, not at the moderators, not at the crowd, directly at him. No theatrics, no visible fury, just precision loading behind her eyes. And then, 12 seconds later, the storm shifted. For a heartbeat, everything was still. The air thickened, stretched. You could almost hear the static of millions watching, breath caught between disbelief and expectation. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward or gesture or perform. She simply waited until Trump's last word collapsed under its own weight. And then, with the calm precision of a surgeon about to cut, she began. Mr. Trump, she said, her tone soft but unmistakable. I've learned that when a man interrupts a woman, it's usually because the truth makes him uncomfortable. The words landed with surgical force. Trump blinked. A flicker, barely perceptible, crossed his face. The audience went silent, a silence so sharp it felt like glass. Crockett continued, voice steady. You've spent your career turning conversation into conquest. Every room a battlefield, every question a threat. But sir, leadership isn't volume, it's vision. A few claps echoed from the back. Nervous, hesitant, but she didn't pause. See, you confuse dominance with direction. You confuse applause with agreement. But what's left when the crowd goes home? What's left when the shouting stops? She looked straight into the camera now, speaking past him, into the living rooms of a nation divided by noise. People are tired. Mr. Trump, tired of watching power pretend to be strength, tired of being told to shout louder instead of think deeper. The camera cut to Trump. His smile was gone. His jaw stiffened. And you can interrupt me all you want, Crockett added, her voice barely above a whisper. But interruption doesn't erase the truth. It only delays it. The room cracked. Applause surged like a wave breaking through restraint. The moderator froze, eyes wide. Trump tried to speak, but the sound tangled in his throat. Crockett leaned back slightly, still composed. You once said you don't lose debates, she said. But maybe that's because no one ever stayed silent long enough for you to hear yourself. Gasps now. Cameras zoomed in. Trump blinked rapidly, shifting in his seat. Crockett pressed on, every word a calculated incision. You see, I don't talk over people because I don't have to. The facts do the talking for me. And the truth, sir, no matter how loudly you shout, doesn't need your permission to exist. The applause grew louder, rolling through the room, cutting through the tension like light through fog. The moderator finally spoke, voice cracking. Let's allow both candidates equal time. But it was too late. The moment had already been claimed. Crockett turned back to Trump, voice almost tender now. I understand interruption. I've seen it my whole life. Women interrupted by men, truth interrupted by ego, progress interrupted by fear. But here's the thing. Silence teaches patience. And patience, Mr. Trump, is what undoes arrogance. A beat. The audience was standing now. Phones rose like torches. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Trump opened his mouth, but no sound came. His hand twitched near the microphone, then dropped. Crockett smiled, not smugly, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows she just changed the air in the room. So if it helps, she added, you can have the last word. I've already made my point. The eruption was instant. Applause thundered. The crowd stood as one. Hashtags were born in real time. On screen, Tweets began flashing like fireworks over the scene. At Real Justice, she just ended him. 12 seconds. That's all it took. At Voice of Reason, this is what grace under pressure looks like. Every woman watching just felt that in her bones. At the silence before she spoke will be studied for years. Cameras swung wildly, some focused on Crockett's composed face, others on Trump's frozen expression. He sat back, eyes darting, lost somewhere between shock and disbelief. Narrator slow, deliberate. In that instant, the energy of the room inverted. The performer became the spectator. The interrupter was silenced by the one he thought he could drown out. The moderator cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Representative Crockett, please, your time has expired. She nodded politely. So has his. Laughter. Applause again. A full standing ovation now. Even some of Trump's usual defenders couldn't hide their reactions. Half grins, raised brows, subtle shakes of the head. Trump tried once more to interject. That's not. But the sound vanished under the roar of the audience. His voice, for once, couldn't pierce the noise. Narrator, it wasn't just a comeback. It was a correction. A cultural reset disguised as a rebuttal. The camera caught Crockett as she gathered her notes. Slowly, deliberately, still smiling. She wasn't savoring victory. She was reclaiming peace. Trump, meanwhile, sat in the harsh light, realizing for perhaps the first time that domination can backfire, that when arrogance meets composure, it crumbles. Backstage, producers were already whispering, "We've got the clip." Editors marked the timestamp. 0 hours, 37 minutes and 42 seconds. The moment. Online, the reactions multiplied. At Black Excellence Now, Jasmine Crockett just taught a masterclass in dignity. At Women in Politics, this wasn't a debate, this was history. At Jen's Fortunes, 12 seconds, 12 years overdue. News alerts broke before the debate even ended. Crockett turns Trump's interruption into iconic moment. The silence heard around the nation, narrator building to crescendo. For years, interruption was his weapon. But tonight, it became his undoing. In 12 seconds, power shifted. Not through anger, not through shouting, but through the quiet precision of a woman who refused to flinch. The music swells. Slow strings and echoing piano, cinematic and bittersweet. The camera lingers on Crockett's face one last time. Calm, centered, victorious without cruelty. She looks down, folds her notes, and whispers something the microphones barely catch. When they shout, I sharpen, a line reverberates. The lights fade, the crowd still roaring, Trump sitting motionless in the glare of a silence he couldn't command. And just like that, 12 seconds turned into a lifetime of echo. But the shockwaves didn't stop in that room. They rippled across the entire nation. It started as a ripple, a few tweets, a handful of short clips, a moment replayed on political subreddits. But within an hour, that ripple had become a storm. Hashtags exploded across every platform. Hashtag Crockett moment, hashtag 12 seconds, hashtag silence wins. The video clip, 12 seconds of calm precision dismantling years of bluster, spread like electricity through a country hungry for composure. By midnight, millions had seen it. By morning, it was everywhere. Cable news anchors played it on loop. The footage slowed and zoomed like a sports replay. The instant Trump interrupted, the pause that followed, the look in Crockett's eyes before she spoke. 12 seconds, one anchor said. That might go down as one of the most powerful moments in modern political debate. Across social media, the reactions were raw, emotional, unfiltered. At Democracy Now, not a raised voice, not a single insult, just truth, clean, surgical, undeniable. At Women Lead 22-5, she didn't clap back. She elevated the room. At The Political Room, this is how you dismantle chaos, with composure. At Civic Soul, for once, silence wasn't awkward, it was powerful. Reaction videos poured in. YouTubers with millions of followers hit record. A political commentator leaned back in awe. I've watched every Trump debate since 2015. I've never seen this man left speechless. Never. A Gen Z creator, tears in her eyes, whispered, that wasn't just politics. That was every woman who's ever been talked over. Finally answering back. Even international viewers joined in. A London radio host said, it's not about left or right. It's about respect. She showed the world what it looks like. Then came the memes, hundreds, thousands, some dramatic. Crockett's.com face superimposed over stills of storm clouds breaking, captions reading silence is strength. Others playful, cinematic remixes with Hans Zimmer scores, or slow motion edits of Trump's stunned expression cut to violins and rising crescendos. TikTok was a flood. One edit opened with the caption, POV, you just interrupted Jasmine Crockett. Cue a slow zoom on Trump's frozen stare. Another set her monologue to the Oppenheimer soundtrack, dramatic, reverent, goosebumping. The soundbite, you confused dominance with direction, became the trending audio of the week. Late-night talk shows jumped in. Jimmy Fallon quipped, Trump said he couldn't be silenced. Crockett said, hold my microphone. Stephen Colbert opened with the line, they say you can't win a debate with silence. Jasmine Crockett just redefined the dictionary. Even conservative hosts, usually unflinching, hesitated. One Fox panelist admitted, "Look, whatever your politics, that was impressive control." He walked into that one. By day 2, the clip had crossed oceans. BBC ran it under the headline, "12 Seconds That Stunned America." Al Jazeera framed it as "Grace Under Fire." In South Africa, a commentator tweeted, "We know that tone. The power of restraint, that's how change begins." Everywhere, people seemed to recognize themselves in that moment. The worker interrupted by a louder colleague, the immigrant dismissed mid-sentence, the student overlooked in class. Crockett's stillness became a mirror, reflecting quiet resilience back to millions who had forgotten what dignity looked like under pressure. Brands joined in. Took, a coffee company tweeted, "Stay grounded, stay composed." B.A. Crockett, a headphones brand, posted, "Block the noise. Focus on the truth." For one rare weekend, the internet wasn't divided by sides. It was united by a feeling, the awe of witnessing someone turn restraint into power. But perhaps the most striking reaction came from those who had doubted her. A conservative journalist wrote, "I don't agree with her politics, but she handled him better than anyone ever has. Respect." Another pundit added, "That wasn't a take, it was a lesson in leadership." The impact wasn't just digital, it was emotional. People gathered around phones in break rooms, rewatching the 12 seconds like a sacred clip. Teachers played it in classrooms as an example of composure. Parents showed it to their daughters. College students quoted her lines on posters and campus walls. Leadership isn't volume, it's vision. Silence teaches patience. Patience undoes arrogance. It was more than a viral moment. It was a shift in tone, a brief, electrifying glimpse of what political discourse could look like if courage didn't always shout. The next day, Crockett herself tweeted simply, "12 seconds. A lifetime of lessons," her words pinned to the top of her feed, liked by millions, shared across every platform. In interviews, when asked if she planned to silence, she smiled and said, "You don't plan grace, you just choose not to lose it." That line alone sparked another wave. For once, politics wasn't about outrage or humiliation, it was about reflection. People didn't just watch the clip, they felt it. It reminded them that dignity wasn't weakness, and truth didn't need a megaphone to be heard. And in a nation that had grown addicted to noise, those 12 seconds became something sacred, a reminder that sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stay quiet. But while the internet celebrated, something deeper was happening, a reminder of what dignity looks like in a divided nation. In the days that followed, the noise began to fade, but the message remained. Commentators moved on to new scandals, new controversies, but that 12-second moment lingered, living quietly in the national conscience. Because in the end, this wasn't just about Donald Trump or Jasmine Crockett. It was about something far larger. Something America had been struggling to remember. For years, the nation had mistaken loudness for leadership. The most aggressive voice in the room always seemed to win, until that night showed another way. Crockett didn't conquer through volume or vengeance. She conquered through stillness. The kind of stillness that comes from knowing who you are. When Trump interrupted her, he was trying to dominate the moment. When she answered him, she redefined it. Her composure became a mirror, reflecting the two sides of modern America, the hunger for attention and the hunger for truth. One built empires on chaos. The other built trust through calm. One shouted to be heard. The other listened to understand that it was never really about politics. It was about posture, how we choose to carry ourselves in the storm. Crockett's restraint wasn't weakness. It was discipline. It was the courage to pause when provoked, to think before striking back, to let silence expose what arrogance tries to hide. That's what made her moment transcendent. It wasn't just a woman standing up to a man. It was dignity standing up to noise. It was patience standing up to power. It was every teacher, mother, worker, immigrant, and dreamer who's ever been interrupted mid-sentence, suddenly realizing, your calm is your strength. And the irony, the very tool Trump had used for years to control every room, interruption, became the stage for his own unraveling. In trying to silence her, he amplified her. In trying to dominate her, he revealed her depth. People began calling it the Crockett Principle. That true power doesn't need to prove itself. It simply stands, steady and unshaken, while the noise burns itself out. Her response reminded the country that democracy, at its core, is supposed to sound like that. Measured, thoughtful, human. The lesson spread far beyond politics. Boardrooms, classrooms, family tables. People started to notice when they interrupted, and when they were interrupted, they started to pause before responding in anger. A tiny shift, maybe, but real change often begins in moments like these. Because when Jasmine Crockett spoke, she wasn't defending herself. She was defending every American tired of being shouted over. Every citizen who's watched truth get drowned by spectacle. Every voice that's been told calm means weakness. She reminded the country that courage doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers. That integrity doesn't perform, it endures. That truth doesn't compete with noise, it outlasts it. And in a time when division feels endless, maybe that's the lesson America needed most. That strength isn't measured by how loud we speak, but by how deeply we listen. That dignity isn't outdated, it's revolutionary. 12 seconds. One pause. A nation reminded of itself. She didn't just win a debate. She restored a belief that even in a world addicted to noise, composure still matters. Because in the end, silence doesn't mean surrender. It means control. But before we close, one truth still echoes louder than any headline. The lights fade. The echo of that moment, those 12 seconds, still hums beneath the narration. Trump interrupted, again. But this time, interruption meant something stronger than outrage. It met grace. Rewind the story's pulse. The chaos, the noise, the laughter, the dismissive waves of a hand. Then, silence. The kind that only truth can create. Jasmine Crockett didn't destroy him the way viral headlines love to say. She revealed something. That calm can dismantle arrogance. That dignity can outshine dominance. That truth, when spoken without fear, carries more power than any insult ever could. And in just 12 seconds, America saw a reflection, not of political warfare, but of what restraint and clarity can do in a storm of ego. For once, the microphone wasn't a weapon, it was a mirror. 12 seconds reminded a divided nation that calm isn't weakness, it's power. As the music swells and the final frame freezes, her steady eyes, his stunned silence, the narrator's voice returns. One question changed everything, because it reminded us who we are and who we still can be. Then the screen fades to black with a simple message. If you believe dignity still has a place in American politics, share this story, subscribe, and let truth speak louder than noise, because sometimes, history doesn't change in revolutions or riots. Sometimes, it shifts in 12 quiet seconds, when one voice, calm and unshaken, reminds the world that composure is still strength.